Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. And welcome to another professional learning meetup of Safa ala Sapa, Language on the Sofa, the first international teachers lounge of its kind of language teachers with an emphasis on the Hebrew language and Israeli culture, which I founded in September 2019. Since then, we have met on the virtual sofa every last Sunday of the month. The Language on the Sofa Forum is an international virtual academy or study room. The main purpose of this meeting is to engage in collaborative learning and mutual cooperation, and to share knowledge, opinions, and materials within an atmosphere of complete trust between the members. I believe that collaborative learning creates a synergy that transcends group conversation and thinking, so that the knowledge and the abilities generated are greater than the knowledge and capabilities of all the individuals in the group. I believe that collaborative learning will also facilitate exciting connections between teachers and schools from different places in Israel and around the world. It gives me great pride to say that this community is growing and flourishing. In order to create the change I envision in the field of Hebrew language and Israeli culture education, I also created a Facebook group for Hebrew teachers around the world and for other language teachers, 972 educators. So if you know a language teacher who could benefit from this forum, I encourage you to tell him or her about the Safa la Sapa forum and about my Facebook group. I'm very happy to see familiar faces and new faces here. Today's meeting is attended by language teachers, Hebrew and English, from around the world, the United States, Argentina, Europe, Israel, and even Egypt. This meeting is simply exciting. I really appreciate each and every one of you for devoting your free time to learning and personal growth. This is not given. Yishar koach. For the benefit of the new teachers here today, my name is Orly. I live in Los Angeles. I'm the founder and owner of 972 Education, which is an online school for students of the Hebrew language of all ages and all levels, and also a school for training language teachers who are interested in promoting experiential and meaningful learning adapted to the 21st century. I conduct training courses in schools around the world on various topics related to language teaching in general and the Hebrew language in particular. And now I'm very honored and grateful to host the one and only Professor Bill Van Patten. Bill Van Patten is a former professor of Spanish and second language acquisition at Michigan State University. He specializes in second language acquisition, which he investigates on both theoretical and practical levels, using techniques from psycholinguistics, applied linguistics, and cognitive psychology. He has published widely and is an award-winning scholar and teacher. Bill now writes fiction in English and Spanish. His first novel, Sidon's Tale, received the 2019 Pop Federling International Books Silver Phoenix Award for the Best New Voice in Fiction. His second novel, Looks Are Deceiving, Looks Are Deceiving won the bronze medal for LGBTQ fiction from a Reader's Favorite International Book Award in 2022 and the 2023 Distinguished Favorite from the Independent Press Award. I follow you, and I think you won a few more since we spoke last time. Bill is currently working on his 5th novel, and apparently he is my neighbor. He lives in the Central Valley of California. I want to thank you, Professor Van Patten, for agreeing to be here with us today, for sharing with us your expertise, knowledge, and experience in second language acquisition, and for volunteering your time with us. It is not taken for granted. I know that you are no longer lecturing about second language acquisition. We are all truly grateful for today's session as we miss drinking tea with Bill Van Patten. I will now ask you, except for you, Professor Van Patten, to mute your microphones. The last 10 minutes of the meeting will be devoted to Q&A. If there are any questions, please write them in the chat. And now, without further ado, Professor Van Patten, the sofa is yours.
I don't know if you want to make this of mine, because I always take naps on my sofa.
Oh, no.
You don't want me falling asleep right now. Thank you so much for inviting me, Orly, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. And thanks to all of you for showing up today. Teachers are busy people, no matter whether they're in Israel, Egypt, Argentina, the United States, or somewhere else. So I appreciate the time that you're putting in to your own professional development and to entertain ideas and ask questions. So I do appreciate that. I've always appreciated talking to teachers. I've always worn 2 hats in my life as a professor. One was a scholarly hat with my research, and the other was how to talk to teachers about things related to second language stuff. And so today I hope I can do the second part of that with you, and that you like it and you find it interesting. Some of these things you may have heard before, or you may have read before. So I'm going to sort of go through some middle ground here. And hopefully there'll be some things new for those of you who are avids and consumers of research. And then maybe lots more for people who aren't, or who haven't really delved into these topics. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. Let me get my PowerPoint slides up and running. Got to do a slideshow, play from the start. There we go. Okay, can everybody see the screen? I'm assuming you can. Those of you I can see on the side. Okay, I see some thumbs up and some heads. Great. Okay, the topic today is the 2 best kept secrets. And I should put a little thing underneath, from language teachers. In my experience, these 2 topics I'm talking about today are the things that language teachers know the least about, if they know anything at all, based on their education and training. And again, some of you may be familiar with these and have some training in this. I don't mean to insult you if you have. Again, my experience in the United States is that most teachers of modern languages just don't have these kinds of backgrounds. But before we do, I'm going to do an ad. Orly already did this for me. As she said, I write fiction now. All teachers need a break, and you all speak and read English no matter where you are. So I invite you to go to my website and see if there's any of my work. I've got short stories as well. I'll just leave it at that. So go to billvanpatten.net and you can read more about what I do when I'm not writing and talking about second language acquisition. Okay, a second ad is this. The talk I'm doing today with you all is in part based on a book that Russ Simons and I have recently written. It was just published in November with the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages, ACFL, and it's called Language Acquisition in a Nutshell, a Primer for Teachers. So if you want to follow up on what I talk about today and want to read, it's a short. All my books with ACFL are very short. They're meant to be for teachers to read in an afternoon, or at most 2 afternoons, a couple hours each afternoon on a rainy day or a hot day you don't want to go outside. then you can pick up one of these to read. Okay, so let's ask the question, why did Orly invite me? Because after all, I don't speak Hebrew, right? I did study the Old Testament in college because I went to a Jesuit university, but of course I read it in English. But I don't speak Hebrew, and I certainly don't teach Hebrew, right? So what does he know about the teaching and learning of Hebrew? Well, what I hope to show you today is that I don't need to know anything particular about Hebrew, although I have looked a few things up in the last couple of months, because we're going to talk about language more generally, and the things we talk about are going to apply to Hebrew and Chinese and Japanese and Korean and Spanish and English and so on. Okay, let's begin with two beliefs that a lot of teachers have, at least the teachers I come in contact with in the United States. One is that textbook grammar is real, and that what's on the pages of a textbook is what students need to learn, right? So on page 10, there's an explanation of something, they need to learn that. On page 32, there's an explanation, they need to learn that, and so on. Or they get charts of verb forms, or they get information about language, and these are the things that they need to somehow internalize and learn. The other belief is that language acquisition involves explicit learning. Tied into this idea of textbook grammar is real is that you use explicit processes of both teaching and learning to get those grammar things in your head that are in books, right? So learn the rules and learn how to use them. Okay, so let's get into what the two best kept secrets are that are going to refute both of those beliefs. The first one is that textbook rules, charts, and so on are not psychologically real. They are not what winds up in our heads. And the first part that we talk about today is going to touch on that. The second best kept secret is that language acquisition is largely, if not exclusively, implicit in nature. And we'll define implicit later on. It does not make use of explicit learning in any meaningful way, in any real way that fundamentally affects language acquisition itself. And again, that'll be the second part of what we talk about today. So let's talk a little bit about language. And again, because I don't speak Hebrew, I'm going to use examples from English, Spanish, and Japanese, of all things. So you can see how these things work at a more abstract level. Quick quiz for you. I and me are different kinds of pronouns, subject versus object. Is that true? Raise your hand real quick for those I can see. Is that true? Most people say it's true, right? And if you learn English or you go online, you'll get a little chart like this. I is subject, me as object, you as subject, you as object, he, she, it are subject, him, her, it are object, and so on, right? Okay, but now let's look what's actually inside anybody's head, whether you're a first learner of English, first language learner of English, or you're a second language learner of English. Okay, first sentence, I am going, me am going. So far it looks correct, right? I as subject, me as object, you can't use me as a subject. But then you have, he wants me to go. What's the subject of go? Who's going to wind up going? Me, right? But notice how I can't say he wants I to go, even though I am the subject of the verb go. It has to be me. So something's funny with that rule right there. Now look what people do in everyday English. John and I are going. John and me are going. Now I substitute me for I when John and I are the subject of going. Me and John are going. I can reverse and put me first. Me and John. These all sound perfectly fine to colloquial everyday speakers of English. You actually find this in print as well. Now watch this. Look at this. He and I are going. Sounds good. You got he and I, subject pronouns. Me and him are going. Now you have two object pronouns replacing the subject pronouns in the previous sentence. But now look at the next one. See, the question mark suggests that we're not sure if it's for English speakers, it sounds good. Him and me are going. Yeah, not as good as me and him are going. But he and me are going, that to me sounds awful as an English speaker. I wouldn't say that. I have to say me and him are going, or he and I are going, right? And notice that he and me just to me sounds awful. Okay. But who's there? I am. Me am. Okay, great. I have to put I there and not me, subject, not an object, right? So the rule works there. But how about this? Who's there? The minute you take the verb out, you cannot use a subject pronoun. You can't just say I. Who's there? I. No, we don't say that in English. Who's there? Me, right? She waved to John and I. That's interesting because normally in English, we would, if you were following the rule, you would say she waved to John and me. But I hear this all the time in English. Again, I've seen this in print too. Something like she waved to John and I, where I now is an object pronoun embedded in the phrase with John. Notice how when you reverse John and I, all of a sudden that sounds awful. She waved to I and John. No, she waved to John and I. Sounds okay to an English speaker. She waved to I and John. No. So what's going on with subject pronouns, object pronouns? It's not quite so neat as this rule of these are subject pronouns and these are object pronouns, right? Much more complicated and probably abstract than that rule. All right. Now let's look at an example from Spanish. I think there's a handful of you are Spanish speakers. I saw some of you are teaching Hebrew in Mexico, and then Orly mentioned Argentina. So this will be familiar to some of you. So I have a quiz for you. Does anybody know what this thing in blue is called in Spanish? B conoce a Russ. Russ is my co-author, right? Do you know what that thing is called? In Spanish, if you teach Spanish, you know it's called a personal a, right? And if you go online, like my students do, this is what they find as the rule. In Spanish, when the direct object is a person, it is preceded by the preposition a. This word has no English translation. It doesn't. The personal a is not used when the direct object is not a person or is an animal for which no personal feelings are felt. That's the first rule you find on Google. If you do a search for personal a, that's the first one that pops up, and that's what my students read. And that looks like what we see in textbooks for teaching Spanish in the United States. But let's look at what's in someone's head if you're a speaker of Spanish. And you have to be fairly advanced in Spanish as a second language learner to have all these down. So Maria conoce a Juan. So Mary knows John, right? Okay, so our rule works. You put an a there because John is a person. Maria conoce la materia. So Mary knows the material. She knows the subject matter. It's not a person. It's an inanimate. You don't put the I in there, right? But now look at sentence number 3. ¿Conoces un buen médico? Do you know a good doctor? Médico, a doctor, is a person. Why don't we put an a there? Most dialects in Spanish would not put one there. If you put it there, it actually means something different. For tengo dos hermanos. I have 2 brothers. I don't, but that's not a factual sentence for me. But again, brothers is human, and it's the object of the verb tengo, I have. So why isn't there an a there? El camión sigue el carro. So the truck is following the car. Dialects and different speakers will vacillate on whether you can put an a here or not, but you'll find this all the time in Spanish, where an inanimate like car with another inanimate noun like truck, you put an I in, right? It's perfectly fine. El chico asustó el coyote. So the boy scared the coyote. This actually happened to me. My dog and I were walking on the golf course, and there was a coyote, and my dog barked at it, and the coyote got scared and ran off. So I changed the sentence slightly for el chico, the boy. So notice here, our rule said earlier that if you're going to put an a in front of an animal, a non-human, an animal, it has to be like a pet, something you have feelings for. Well, nobody knows who this coyote is. He doesn't have a name. It could be a he, she, we don't know. But I can still put an a there. In fact, in my dialect of Spanish, I really, really, really want to put an a there, right? I wouldn't leave it out. So there's much more going on here than what the personal a says. You know, in fact, personal a is misnamed. That's a bad name for this thing, right? And clearly how it is used in Spanish is much more complicated and abstract than what a textbook rule can capture. Now, lots of languages have this what's called differential object marking. Over 300 languages around the world do this. And it's difficult to capture in rules just what is going on in speakers' minds. And I'm sure you all want to talk about et later on, if you want to, and asking questions at the end. Because in modern Hebrew, you see some of the classic hard and fast rules about differential object mark changing. And I've read a couple of research papers this last month on what's going on in Hebrew. And linguists aren't clear exactly what's going on. They're working on it, but something is happening. And it's, again, it's much more complicated and abstract than what we might tell language learners as a hard and fast rule. Okay, anybody here speak Japanese? Anybody know anything about Japanese? Do you know where the verb goes in Japanese sentence? Well, here's a Japanese sentence. So where does the verb go? It goes at the end, right? So you got subject, object, verb. Okay, English and Hebrew are subject, verb, object languages, right? So the question becomes, why does it go at the end? Why does the verb go at the end of Japanese? When you look at Japanese, you get separate textbook rules for interesting things that we're going to see in a moment are all related. The verb goes at the end of the sentence. So here you have, I don't speak Japanese very well, so I'm not going to try to say the sentence, I would butcher it. But imasu, which is the verb is, you can see is at the end of the sentence. Watashi means I, by the way. Case markers go after nouns. So that's why you have the ga, which is nominative, goes after the noun for fly. Particles go after nouns.
No.
Particles go after nouns, right? So notice how Japanese doesn't have a word like mine. So what you do in Japanese, you take the watashi, which means I, and you add the no, which means possessor, and that's how you get I. But it has to go after the noun. So we're starting to see things here where something goes after something, right? Okay, what's really in someone's head if you're a speaker of Japanese, and this is true for first and second language learners as well. Languages are built of what we call phrases. Most of you probably have heard like a noun phrase, an NP, a verb phrase, a prepositional phrase. In phrases, things like nouns, verbs, and prepositions are heads, right? So preposition is the head of a prepositional phrase, a noun is the head of a noun phrase, and so on. You go down the list of all the phrases, and there's a head, and there's something else, right? So languages are divided into two classes regarding word order. Head plus complement, which are English, French, Russian, and modern Hebrew, for example, and complement plus head, which would be languages like Japanese, classical Latin, Turkish, and Quechua, spoken in the Andean region of South America. Everybody knows that, right? Okay, so what does this mean for how languages work? Because in English, all phrases are head plus complement, we get sentences like this. What we're going to do is start on the right-hand side. See what's in blue brackets? DP stands for determiner phrase. My is a determiner, like the and some and right? So it's the head of my soup. That's why you have my and followed by soup. Now look at the green brackets. You have a prepositional phrase. In my soup. In is the head. My soup is a complement. It follows it. Then you have another DP. Look at the purple brackets. You have another determiner phrase, right? You have a fly in my soup. Is the determiner, and fly in my soup is the complement of that and then so on, right? Okay, now, how about Japanese? This is gonna look a little funny to you because it's the word order is different, right? So you can see, for example, go back to the purple brackets, this is like going from left to right. Watashi no, which is the determiner phrase that makes the equivalent of English my, the head no goes after the complement, right? And then you have the postpositional phrase, and you say the ni comes after watashi no supu, right? And so on. And so Japanese has a reverse order of English, and English has a reverse order of Japanese because of the way phrases work. In other words, there's not a list of rules in anyone's head in Japanese, where to place verbs, where to place particles, case marks, and so on. Instead, what you have is this abstract concept that language has heads and complements that make phrases, and then it all falls out into a pattern of things in your head almost automatically. We actually have research on this, by the way. We did this with learners of Japanese who knew no SOV, subject, object, verb languages. And literally within 100 being exposed to 100 sentences, they were already making projections about Japanese word order and all kinds of things they hadn't even learned. Really interesting stuff. Okay, so in other words, there's this one abstract principle in Japanese that heads follow their complements, and this is what you actually acquire in your head, not 3 or 4 or 5 separate rules. Okay, so what's our summary so far on this? Just what is language then? Well, it's mental representation, it's stuff in your head, right? It's abstract, heads, complements, phrases. These are kind of abstract concepts, right? It's complex. These interact in various ways for us to make sentences that most people wouldn't understand, even if we tried to explain it to them. And it's implicit in the sense that we don't know that we have things like heads and complements in our heads, in our mental representation, right? We have language, we know we have language, but we don't really know what the content is. That's why it's called implicit. And language cannot be captured by textbook rules. It's just too abstract and complex. Now, what we just summarized about language being abstract, complex, and implicit is true for every language out there, whether it be, again, Chinese, Japanese, modern Hebrew, Quechua, Turkish, English, French, whatever. This idea of an abstract, complex, and implicit nature of language is true. So the idea here is that language isn't what most of us think it is. It certainly isn't what students think it is. And it's not what a lot of teachers, in my experience in the United States, think it is. It doesn't consist of textbook rules. And so the question becomes, what are textbook rules? You may not like my answer to this, but this is the answer. Textbook rules are remnants or derivatives of Latin grammars from the Middle Ages. And at least in the United States, the way textbooks are published in the United States, all the idea, the way we talk about grammar is derivative of the way monks and other people back in the Middle Ages, when they're trying to create books about Latin and ancient Greek, by the way, how they describe Latin and Greek, that became the language used by everybody, including up until the 21st century. The textbook rules are also not very good and often inaccurate attempts to describe the abstract and complex nature of language, right? So while it may be accurate to say that the verb comes at the end of the sentence in Japanese, that doesn't capture the abstract nature of heads and complements. And in the Spanish example, with the so-called personal we saw that that rule is so inaccurate because there's all kinds of variations on when you can use and when you can't. Okay, here's one more point before we move on. And that's that some things that language is, and I want to make sure that we understand what I'm talking about today. Language is not spelling or orthography, right? In languages like Arabic and Hebrew, for example, or Japanese, spelling and orthography become very important because they aren't Western languages in the classic sense of using a Latin alphabet. But don't forget, languages existed before there was spelling or orthography. These are conventions to try to capture on the page or in clay tablets or on a papyrus what people were already saying orally, what was in their heads, right? So this is an artifact of culture and not part of language itself. Paragraph structure, how we do a paragraph. Different cultures and different systems of communication structure paragraphs differently. In English, we like a thesis sentence, something that captures your attention, supporting arguments, a concluding sentence. We talk about those kinds of things all the time. That's not language either. That's something else, right? Style, whether you're informal or formal, whether you say things like ain't or isn't, and so on. Even if you use ain't in English, you may not know this, but there are very abstract and complex rules that govern the use of ain't in English. You can't use ain't just any old way, right? So things like style fall outside of the nature of language. Social norms, how we say thank you, how we don't say thank you, how we interrupt, and so on. All these things may be very important, in fact, are important, but they aren't language. They fit, in my mind, what we call the realm of communication. And that's a whole nother topic we could have on some other day. How communication is different from language, and what are the things we acquire when we acquire communication. But language underlies communication in many ways, so that's why I separate the two out. Okay, so now let's talk about, I know everybody already has questions already, right? So we'll hold off on questions, and let's talk about implicitness. Okay, so what's the difference between explicit learning and implicit learning? Raise your hand if you've heard of these concepts. If you've heard of these concepts, explicit learning and implicit learning. Explicit learning is learning with awareness of what is being learned. So typically involving purposeful and intentional learning. For example, I purposely and intentionally learn a rule about language, like if the object is a person, after the verb, you insert an That's explicit learning. Implicit learning is learning without awareness of what is being learned. So for example, when I'm learning Japanese, I don't know I'm learning about heads and complements and that it's complement head. I'm just learning Japanese, right? And this typically involves a purposeful and intentional attempt to comprehend what is being said and what is written, right? So language acquisition under implicit learning is a byproduct of comprehension. Now, as we saw earlier in discussion of language, language is too complex and abstract to be learned explicitly. I mean, just think about that. Do you really want to teach your learners about heads and complements, or the way phrase structures work and embeddings and all that kind of stuff? And we also saw that textbook rules have no psychological validity. But technically and in short, you can learn textbook rules explicitly. That's why they're there, right? So you can learn those easy rules of thumb explicitly. But the question becomes, can you learn language explicitly, as we've been talking about it, this abstract, complex thing? At the theoretical level, the centrality of implicit learning is the default position. Now, why would that be? Why would theorists in language acquisition and linguistics say implicit learning must be the default, that must be central to what happens? Why would they say that? Because we just can't teach the abstract and complex properties language. Again, as I said earlier, try teaching headedness to learners. I mean, why would you even do that, right? These kinds of things must be acquired implicitly, and our brains are ready to do that. Now, that's theory, but what about research? Now, research has been converging over the last 20 years on the idea that acquisition is largely, if not exclusively, implicit in nature, not just for first language learners, but for all language learners and all ages. Now, there are two main strands of research: order development and research on the effects of instruction itself. Okay, so what are these things? What do they tell us? Okay, everybody has seen this life cycle of frog, right? I had to study this in my science class when I was in high school. You know, you start the eggs, then there's a tadpole hatches, see the little fins, then the second tadpole, the fins get lost. And then what you see next is the tadpole grows back legs, and then it grows front legs. And at that point, it's starting to lose its gills and it's getting lungs. And then it's got its legs, it still has a tail, and then it finally loses its tail, and so on. This is how a frog develops. But here's your quiz. Can a frog skip a stage? Why can't a frog just go from eggs to frog? Why does it go through these stages? Can it reorder the stages? Can I develop front legs first and then back legs, right? Can I get lungs before I get gills? Am I a frog? The answer is obviously no. It has to happen in this order. Well, order development and language acquisition is a big, big indicator of implicit learning. So let's look at an example from Spanish, because this is research I started doing way back when in the 80s, 1980s. I have to say 19 now because we're in the 20s. It's like, oh gosh. Okay, Spanish has two verbs equivalent to be. One is ser and the other is estar. So unlike Hebrew, these verbs cannot be left out of any sentence. So in modern Hebrew, for example, in the present tense, you can leave out the verb be, right? Which gives you an indication that it functions the same way as an estar in Spanish. It's technically just a tense marker, which is why you insert it when you have other tenses. Okay, so in stage one of the acquisition of ser and estar, we've done this with classroom learners and non-classroom learners. Chinese is an L1, French is an L1, Korean is an L1, and English is an L1, right? And various other languages. In stage one, you tend to get omission. So in this stage, L2 learners often omit verbs of being completely. So they say things like Bill profesor. I'm going to do the English accent on Bill profesor, Terry preocupada, right? They don't put a verb in when they should put a verb in. In stage two, ser emerges and becomes the dominant verbs. And the verb estar is largely absent, but maybe using what are called chunk expressions, right? So you get Bill es profesor, which is the correct use of it there. But then you also get Terry es preocupada when it should be está, right? So you get overuse of ser everywhere. You might get a chunk expression like como estás or como está for how are you, but learners don't really know what the está is doing there. It's like one big word for them. Stage three, you get estar as an auxiliary to describe progressive action. So Terry está corriendo, so Terry is running, right? I went and go back and say, Terry preocupada or Terry está preocupada. That would be Terry is worried or concerned. And then the final stage is you start to use as a copular verb, a regular linking verb, not auxiliary verb, but a regular linking verb to describe location and certain physical and emotional states. So Terry está en casa for Terry is home. Terry está preocupada for Terry is worried or concerned, right? And again, these stages have shown to exist in classroom, non-classroom learners, and so on. Now, we've got lots of work on stage development. I'm not going to go through this one in the interest of time. I'm going to just put it up so you can see real quick that we've done work with negation and that there's stages in the acquisition of negation that transcend various languages. So we have very abstract stages, right? In the acquisition of negation. Now, it may take a long time for learners to pass through stages. In other words, we're not talking about learners go through these stages in a year. No, actually, it takes them a long time to go through these stages. Just like little kids take a long time to go through stage development in first language acquisition. And also learners vary in their rates of development. So some learners go through the stages faster than the others, but they don't rearrange the stages. They tend not to, you don't really see skip stages, although if you don't get the learner just at the right time, a stage for that learner may only last a couple of months. If you don't go in and test that learner that couple of months, you may not see that stage. You'll see it look like they skipped the stage when you finally get data from them, but actually they've gone through that stage. Now, what stage development shows is that learners create systems in their heads independent of explicit learning and teaching. So, I mean, think about this. Why would a learner explicitly, on purpose, intentionally create a stage in Spanish and leave the verb out? Why would a learner explicitly, intentionally, and on purpose create a stage where we take one verb and use it everywhere and ignore the other verb, right? These things are happening to the learner implicitly as their mind is organizing and processing data it gets from the environment. And like the tadpole to frog development, this stage development cannot be altered or reordered. You can't go from stage 1 to stage 4 in Spanish, for example, with sentence style. It just doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. We've looked for since the 1980s, and this research has held up all the way up into the 2020s, by the way. There's some research as late as 2021. Some kind of implicit processes drive stage development. Learners don't consciously create stages, as I said, which they omit verbs or assume a language is tenseless or selectively use negators the way they do in negation and so on. Again, this system grows outside of awareness. And just to put an exclamation point on this slide before we move on, there's been work on stage development in Japanese, in German, in French, in English, in Spanish, in various languages, right? So we just take stage development now as a given in second language acquisition, even if we haven't examined or looked at detailed stage development in all languages, right? Okay, now, the second strand of research that supports implicit is research on the effects of explicit instruction and explicit learning, right? In other words, this is where you purposely teach someone and learners purposely learn something and you see what effects it has. So there are 3 areas of research on this. What happens when we try to teach against order development, what's called knowing more than what you've been taught, and laboratory research on discrete items. Okay, so let's look at order development. There's research that shows that instruction has no effect on order development. In fact, all the research shows this. Learners exhibit order development with and without instruction. And if you purposely try to teach things and have them skip stages, it doesn't happen. And in some cases, research has shown that explicit instruction can impede order development, can actually slow down acquisition, cause it to not go as quickly as it could if they weren't getting that kind of explicit instruction in practice and a focus on explicit learning. Okay, what does knowing more than what you've been taught mean? Well, there's abundant research that shows that learners come to know more than they were taught, and in many cases, things they couldn't have been taught. Somehow they're getting these things, and it has nothing to do with their instruction, right? So here's a classic example from English. You know, we can take the verb want and we contract and make wanna, right? So I want to go can become I want to go. We say that all the time in English. And then who do you want to invite to the party is in colloquial English, who do you want? Nobody says want to. Everybody says, who do you want to invite to the party, right? But learners come to know without being taught, without any evidence that, who do you want to speak to Bill? You can't do. You can't say, you can't take, who do you want to speak to Bill? Let's say you're going to fire Bill, right? Get rid of him. So you want somebody to speak to him, right? So who do you want to speak to Bill? You can't contract there. You can't contract wanted and wanna. You can't do it, right? And every speaker of English comes to know this. How do they know this kind of stuff? We have all kinds of examples of what we know goes way beyond what we were taught. I mean, you can be taught a rule in English, right? Many of you may, if you're not in English, were taught, you can contract want to and wanna. But you weren't taught where you couldn't contract, most of you. I'm assuming you weren't, because I've looked at English textbooks and they tend not to do that. There's just all kinds of examples of things where people have this unconscious knowledge and abstract knowledge that they couldn't have gotten through instruction, and sometimes not even based on the evidence they've been exposed to. Then there's laboratory research. In laboratory research, what you do is you get a bunch of learners and you pre-test them on some feature, some grammar point, or whatever you want to. Then you teach and practice that thing in a variety of ways. It could be comprehension-based, production-based, it could be this. And then afterwards, you give a post-test to see if they've improved, right? That's a standard design. Now, in this design, the research shows improvement after instruction, almost always. 95.9% of the cases, you see some kind of improvement. However, the research also shows the effects disappear rather quickly. That is, there are no long-term effects. I published a paper in 2004 with a student and colleague of mine where we reviewed all the reading. There were only 5 or 6 studies at that point, and then ours was a long-term study where we went and looked at, where people went and looked what happened after 6 months, 9 months, a year. All the research, all the effects of instruction had disappeared. Very often it disappears as quickly as a month. Oops, my thing does not want to, there we go. Uh-oh, my little arrow doesn't want to work anymore. Okay, there are problems with this research though. First, there's a bias for testing textbook rules and not the abstract, complex, and implicit knowledge. As we saw before with explicit learning, you can take any simple rule that's not complex and abstract, practice it, and get some kind of results with it, right? We do that all the time in teaching. Also, the tests used in this kind of research bias for explicit knowledge. They favor the testing of explicit knowledge, not abstract, complex knowledge that we call language. Now, what's happening in this line of research is it's converging on this conclusion. And this is not me, this is a whole host of scholars in the field saying explicit learning results in explicit knowledge, not an implicit system, not language like we've been talking about. Explicit knowledge does not become an implicit, abstract, complex system. In other words, there's no mechanism in the human mind or brain, or mind-brain, whatever you want to call that thing. There is no known mechanism by which taking an explicit rule you learned from a textbook somehow converts it into an implicit, abstract, complex, part of an explicit, abstract, complex system. That mechanism just doesn't exist. So the idea here is that explicit knowledge, textbook type rules, and language, the implicit system, are qualitatively different. And I like to tell teachers, think about it this way. You've seen a chemical formula for water, right? H2O. Have you ever seen a chemical formula for olive oil? It's this big, long molecular chain with carbon and hydrogen and oxygen and other kinds of things in it. But it's just this big, long molecular chain. Think of water as explicit knowledge and olive as your implicit system. These two molecules are radically, qualitatively differ from each other in terms of content, structure, and all kinds of things. And there's no way that we know of that we can take water and turn it into olive oil. We can't do that. It doesn't happen, right? So that's a little metaphor if you want to keep something in your head for that. So what are some of the implications for teaching? Well, it depends on what your goals are. I'm going to try to wrap up here in the next couple of minutes so that we can have plenty of time for questions. There are no implications if your goal is to have learners learn textbook rules, which can be a goal, right? Or if your textbook is a foundation of your curriculum and the outcome is to take a test, right? That happens in lots of places. For example, like a lot of you, if you're non-native speakers of English, you may have to take a TOEFL test, right? To get into college or to do something, right? And there's lots of courses where you study for the TOEFL, you know, blah, blah, blah. And the whole point of taking that course is so you can pass the TOEFL test. There are implications if your goal is to foster language acquisition and ultimately the development of communicative ability, right? Because those two go hand in hand, which we can talk about in the question and answer period if you want to know what I mean by that. So what are those implications? One is that the expression, interpretation, and meaning become primary in the classroom and in out-of-classroom activities. What does that mean? The expression, interpretation, and meaning. That is, people saying things and people listening to things, people writing things and people reading things become primary because there's something in that language that's important. What is that? It's communicatively embedded input, right? And what that means is that there is some kind of interaction that is level appropriate between a speaker and a learner, or a teacher and a learner, or a teacher and learners, right? In which learners are getting access to data. I'll put data in quotes, but I don't really mean it to be in quotes. There's access to data in this input, this language they're exposed to, because language acquisition is selective. That's why we see stage development and other kinds of things. The learner's internal mechanisms are responsible for choosing things in the input and working with them at a given point in time, right? The idea here for teachers then is that what learners need is a lot of communicatively embedded input. That is teachers talking with learners, having conversations, discussions, using particular kinds of texts and readings and so on, where the learners are actively involved in interpreting meaning. So we talk with learners, not at them. We get them to interact with text. We don't just throw texts at them. Again, why do we want this? Because the data needed for acquisition are found in this kind of input. They're not found in rules. They're not found in practice. They're not found in lists. They're found in the language that learners are exposed to that is embedded in communicative events. Okay. Another implication is that teachers should not try to teach rules through input or teach them implicitly. This is a lot of mistake that I find that teachers try to do. They go, okay, input's so important. So what they do is they take their textbooks. How can I teach this rule on page 32 through input? That's going to fail as much as, because you're still gauging learners in explicit learning. You're not really engaging them in the processing of meaning and the interpretation of meaning, because they know what you're trying to do, right? What's interesting is when teachers do that, what they don't understand is that what learners are getting out of that input are things that the teachers aren't even aware they're getting out of the input. They think, oh, I'm teaching this rule now through input, but what the learners are actually getting out of the input are other things, okay? So teaching implicitly through input would be taking old wine and putting in new bottles. We take the old grammar rules, we dress them up in something different, right? Okay, what else? What are the implications for teaching if you think about acquisition and the nature of language? We have to have a change in expectations, right? What can learners do at a given point in time? What's going on in their heads? I have to understand and expect that they will not be native-like, and they won't be native-like for a long time. I have to understand that there's going to be stage development. I have to stop thinking about errors, that when learners do things that are non-native, those aren't errors. Those are just non-native structures and non-native forms, right? That's just the way language acquisition happens. So we want to change what teachers should do in the classroom in the sense of those expectations. How should I spend my time? How can I construct a classroom, and what kind of attention can I expect out of my students, and so on? What learners should do. Okay, so I moved from learners, memorizing and doing things and learning rules and taking tests to, well, how should they be interacting in class? Is it okay for them to answer in one-word answers to my questions? Because maybe they're at the one-word stage and they can't make sentences. If I force them to make sentences, then what's that going to look like? How are they going to do that if they don't have the language in their heads yet, right? And then again, changing our expectations in what explicit teaching and practice achieves, right? What does that really do? So if we have realistic expectations, for example, that it doesn't result in long-term effects, only short-term effects, if we understand that explicit teaching and learning doesn't become an implicit system, then when we understand those kinds of things, we can start to change the expectations above, what teachers should do and what learners should do. This is a tough one. Another implication for teaching is how to monitor learner progress and what this means for assigning grades. If you teach in an institution, an educational institution, you're being asked to monitor students and assign grades. Well, how do you do that if you're teaching for acquisition communication? This is not anything anybody has solved, and I have no solutions here, but it's something we have to seriously think about. One suggestion I have is that we all start working with state and national organizations to issue grades in favor of other measures and to get them to adopt guidelines that reflect the themes we've talked about here, right? In the United States, I'm going to focus on the United States. Israel did some interesting things back in the 80s and 90s. I don't know if they're still doing it with the teaching of English, but in the United States, we still don't have state and national organizations helping teachers get out of this problem of educational institutions expecting certain things out of them, right? And so we need to, as teachers, need to put pressure on our state and national organizations. Help us. We need to make change. You're not helping us make change with administrators and school systems and governments, right? And we have to learn how to lobby for language acquisition, that it's not the same thing as learning subject matter. For example, we need voices in schools of education, voices in government who say, look, learning language is not the same thing as learning history or math or science. You have to let us develop our own tools and our own ways of measuring things, right? You need to let's think outside the box. And then this also involves that we have to educate parents, administrators, and others, depending on the levels we teach at. How's that? With time for questions?
Thank you so much. Thank you. And toda ala toda. Thank you ala.
Toda.
Toda.
I went with a simple toda because I wanted to be nice and simple. Just thank you.
Toda raba. Toda raba. And now, yeah, I see. Thank you so very much. And I would like to ask if I didn't see any question. Did I miss anything?
Ari has his hand raised if you want to call on him.
Okay. Go ahead, Ari. Please introduce yourself because I don't know you. I don't think.
Thank you. Shalom, Orly. My name is Ari. I am an Israeli who lives in America in the Boston area. I live and I teach at a Reformed Jewish day school, a K through 8 Reformed Jewish day school. I teach Hebrew to kindergartners and first graders. I used to teach Hebrew in an explicit way and was always very frustrated in the classroom. I would teach things that I felt they needed to know, and it was really tricky. I used to teach in the higher grades in middle school, and it was always a battle. Along came a director of the Hebrew department who taught us about your theory and taught us about how to understand language and teaching language implicitly, and how you go from input to intake to developing systems and eventually to output. And it radicalized my teaching, and the effort in terms of cutting my teeth on teaching dramatically reduced, and the retention and abilities of my students dramatically increased. And it's been such a joy to watch. And so I really understand a lot more about why I should just speak and make my conversation meaningful, and really understand what comprehensible input. I'm saying that wrong, but
that's right. Are you saying it right? Comprehensible input, yeah.
Yeah, really to make it meaningful and compelling and playful and interactive, which of course kindergarten and first graders lend themselves to that. But one of the things I'm wondering about is, how do I take, where I'm really kind of working at is, when do I know when to dedicate tasks to the input intake relationship, and when should I design activities toward the developing system? How do I know when and how to develop particular activities to these different stages of the language acquisition, as opposed to just staying in comprehensible input all the time?
You can't. Because what you're in charge of is the input. What the learner is in charge of is intake and the developing system. That happens inside the learner's head without your direct intervention, right? And so, our job is just like a parent talking to a child. Our job is to have conversations and to have interesting, like you say, compelling things in our classroom that students and learners want to pay attention to, and are, I don't want to say hanging on your every word, but are there, and because if it's not, it's just noise to them, right? So allow the fact that allow those things about intake and the developing system. For those of you who don't know, intake is that part of the input that learners actually process. Okay, they get a speech stream. You think they're processing every part of that speech stream? No. They're getting bits and pieces. Learners selectively process data from the input. They just do, all along the way, all levels of language acquisition that happens, right? And so that's out of our control as teachers, and out of our control as researchers too, right? So we just have to understand that we're in charge of the environment. We're in charge of what they get exposed to, but they're in charge of acquisition. That's pretty much it in a nutshell. And I will say one other thing, Ari, that you said. You talked about compelling and interesting things, and you talked about engaged stuff. That's easy with kindergartners and first graders. Believe it or not, some of the stuff you do at that level works for adults too, and even teenagers. Maybe not quite the same content. Like you might have a story about a frog, and the first graders will love a story about a frog, right? Well, you could have the same kind of story with teenagers and adults, but it may not be about a frog, and maybe about a teenager. So compelling and engaging, the kinds of things we do with kids, because I taught university level adults for a long time, and boy, it's amazing how they will get so engrossed in a story or a topic. Because it's just really, really interesting and fun, right? So,
thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
That's a good observation, Bart. Thank you for sharing your story with us.
Thank you for radicalizing my teaching and infusing it with joy again. Thank you. Really mean.
That's me, Mr. Radical. Don't tell the FBI. Don't tell the FBI.
Okay.
Okay. I think if you look, all right, Daphne has a question.
Ronit has a question as well.
There's Daphne, and then
sorry, Daphne, I didn't see you.
It's okay. Ronit, go first. It's okay.
Okay. So my question is, when you're working as part of a school system that has a program that is relate on a book, not only on a book, but like steps of the language that start with present, past, future, right? And we have content that is provided to us. Of course, we are not only leaning on that content and bringing authentic material and activities that has comprehension and input. How do you suggest to do a transition to go more to the CI than lean on the book? Because you need to be in that content, so the next teacher next year we know what they covered,
Right.
and continue.
Right.
I hope I'm understood.
Yeah, I understand you perfectly well. Let me just make a comment about the word covered, and then I'll come back and see if I can answer your question for you, because it's a hard question. It's not an easy question to answer. We got to get rid of the concept of covered. In language acquisition, we no longer cover material. We cover stories, content, conversations. So the only thing your second year teacher needs to know about the first year teacher is, what did you talk about? What were some of your activities? What were the stories you used, blah, blah. So that teacher is going to repeat the stories, the same kinds of conversations and so on, right? So it's a matter of organizing yourself around topics and content and stories, as opposed to material you're going to cover, vocabulary, grammar, and so on, right? So we need to get out of that. We need to rethink what cover means, right? Covering material. My experience is that I don't know anything about your district or your school, the institution you teach at, Ronnie, but if everybody is not on board, you have to start there. You need to have everybody understand the same things and speak the same quote unquote language of acquisition and the nature of language, so that people want to get behind and make the change. I did a workshop a couple of years ago up in San Ramon, here in California, with a district. I did it with various languages, but it was the Spanish teachers that invited me to do this workshop, because they wanted me. In fact, the morning workshop I worked with everybody. And the afternoon workshop was just with the teachers, and they had already they were already at that point where they all wanted to get rid of a textbook. They just didn't know what to do. But you have to get everybody to that point. So if you're not, once you get to that point, technically it's actually kind of easy. Once you get, the political part and the social part is the hardest part. Get everybody on the same page, get everybody agree. So what we want to do, what do we want our outcomes to be? Once you get there, developing the content is really not as difficult as people think it is. And it's easy to bring someone in, and within a 4 or 5 hour workshop, you can have all kinds of ideas generated and you'll be off and running. The Spanish group wound up redoing their first 2-year curriculum in the 2 months that summer they had off. They completely redid their curriculum, wrote it themselves. But they just needed some help, needed some guidelines. That's what I helped them with, structuring the content stuff. So step one is get everybody on board, get over the social and political stuff and the nature of things and so on, get the administration on board, show parents, and if you teach K through 12, show parents what outcomes are going to be and so on. And then sit down and start working on your content. You should be working in content would go rather quickly. That's really kind of fun. And I have ideas for things like flash fiction I could share with you at some point. I'm a big believer in flash fiction for students. I've developed in Spanish a series of 3 books. All the stories are 400 words or less. And they're really good stories, if I may say so myself. At least I'm getting really positive feedback. And they have embedded questions in them. So you don't just read the story. You stop at a certain point, ask questions. And the teacher does certain things with the stories, and there's follow-up activities based on the story and themes you can develop. The next thing you know, you spend an entire week curriculum based on this 400-word story. It's just all the stuff just rolls out of itself, right? So there are ideas that you can use like that I could help you with later on if you get to that point. So, but the first step is get everybody on board.
Get everybody on board. That's our I think main problem.
Yep. That's everybody's main problem. So,
Daphna, thank you.
Daphna.
Hi, so I'm Daphna. I'm the head of Hebrew department in Universidad Hebraica in Mexico City. And thank you very much. I'm honored to be here and hear you. I quote you a lot, so it's really, really exciting. And thank you to Orly for all the things she does.
I'm sorry, I have to ask Daphna real quick. Did you go to the Giants Padres game in Mexico City the other day?
No.
We all don't know, in California, the Giants from San Francisco and the San Francisco Padres went to Mexico City to play.
Yeah.
It was quite a different experience for them from American California-based fans in the SNAM. Anyways.
Yeah, I know. I heard about it, but I'm not a fan. So
okay.
So we have Hebrew. We work with Hebrew teachers, but we have students in the university, like 80 each semester, 80 people that learn Hebrew, grown-ups, Jewish and not Jewish. And it's very exciting, and it's really good experience. But we have a dealing with not just the teachers to change the focus and the approach of how to teach. We have the problem with the students, the grown-ups. They don't understand that the rules, it's not the main issue. So they have a problem with their own experience. So they start studying with us, and then I don't know, 1 semester, 2 semesters, 3 semesters, and they leave because they are frustrated, because they want to know everything. Kids, we all know, are more holistic, so they are not care about those kind of issues, but the adults, the grown-ups, they are all the time ask, and why this, and why it's the exception, and they get frustrated. So how can we, can you give us some tips how to deal with it, the teachers, the students? What can you say about it?
I can say 2 things. I used to do this to my students when I first started teaching Spanish many, many years ago, and I was not quite at that point where I was doing what I was told to do when I was a teaching assistant, for example, and had to use a textbook and so on. My students would always ask, why is it this and why is it exception? And I would look at them and just say this: if you can tell me why it's this in English and not this in English, I'll answer your question for you. So in other words, I always put back what they know and what they don't know about their first language before I'll answer their questions, and get them. And it was that constant retraining of, oh, maybe language is what I think it is. Now, a friend of mine, a colleague of mine, when I used to be back at the University of Illinois, did a very interesting experiment with college-age students. We used to meet 5 days a week. I don't know how many days a week you make, but think about something like this. And you don't have to do what she did, but do some version of this. She had regular class Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, but Friday was acquisition day. And they had to read something about acquisition as homework on Thursday night. And then the next day they'd have discussion, question, and so on. And so every Friday for the entire first semester that they were in the classes with her that year, they learned about language acquisition, and their attitudes completely shift. By the middle of the semester, they were done. Okay, I don't want to. She would come in and she'd say, "You want to learn about it?" No. Let's just keep going with whatever we're doing. They didn't want to learn rules anymore. Their attitudes toward the nature of the language, the nature of language acquisition changed. So consider who your audience is and how you can re-educate them, and what you can do with the time frame you have. And again, some of the stuff could be with adults. It could be 10 or 15 minutes out of a week. You give them something to read one night, and then say, tomorrow when you come to class, we're gonna review this. We're gonna talk about language and language acquisition in this class off and on, because you need to know this stuff. So need to know why you're doing it. You need to understand what's going on in your own head. And I bet you could get those adults to start thinking differently within a month or 2. I really do. Diane did this, and it was amazing. And I often recommend this to teachers. I did this in my own class when I first started teaching and issuing textbooks. And I knew students would come from high school. Where are my worksheets? Where am I this? Where am I that? you're not in high school anymore, you're in my class. But I realized, oh, I need to educate them. And so I started doing that. 10 minutes here, 5 minutes there, and so on.
These are great tips. I had a student.
And I have, and the books I've written, by the way, with Actful, you might want to look at those books. There's 3 of them. While we're on the topic, The Nature of Language, and then this last one, Language in a Nutshell. They're short books. I wrote them for teachers, not for scholars. So they simplified a lot of concepts, make it easy. You can go into those books and grab little bits and pieces and simplify them even more for your audiences if you want to. You won't be plagiarism if you do that. So think about, you can do stuff like that. Those books, you're not going to go find big books on second language acquisition that are going to be useful to you for that. You need to find books like that I write, some others write, that are for you, teachers, right? And also, I also write books so that you can give them to principals and parents to read, right? Not full of a lot of jargon. If there's any jargon, it's explained right away. Very easy to read for people who aren't linguists and people who aren't teachers, for that matter. So feel free to steal those ideas and use them with your students. Okay, who's next, Orly?
I had some students that had anxiety, that they knew that I'm not allowing any dictionaries in my classroom. Oh my God, it was a disaster until they understood that all the words that are in the dictionary will stay in the dictionary. They're not going to use them on their own if they're going to keep on opening the dictionary.
Right.
They're not going to use them. So anyways, it's a good one with the students, even to educate them how to learn a language, right?
I don't know what Ari's experience was. I don't know if he's still there or not, but when you start teaching differently, even with adults, I mean, I taught some night schools sometimes with like 40 and 50-year-olds, right? And if you make them feel good about comprehension and they walk out of your first hour or your first 2 hours going, wow, I understood almost everything you said, that also is part of the education process. So it's all about those first impressions we make on them early on, in the sense of making them feel good about how they learn and about their success. So there's nothing more satisfying to any age group than to walk out that first day and go, it was fun, it was interesting, God, and I understood almost everything.
I have a question, Orly.
Hold on, Bill, I know it's 12:15. I'm just asking you if you're willing to stay for another 1 or 2 questions.
Sure, of course.
Go ahead, Dalit.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor. It's an honor talking to you. And thank you, Orly.
It's an honor talking to you. How's that?
Thank you so much. I have a question. I'm a teacher here in high school, and I teach mostly heritage learners.
Oh, okay.
They come with a beautiful second language. They can speak fluently. They understand, and it really feels there's a demand almost from parents to teach more explicitly. They want to see improvement in their spelling. They want to see them using grammatically correct sentences. And I do try. I love this approach of the implicit learning, but when they bring home their essay and paper, and there's so many spelling mistakes, and the parents feel to be frustrated of, there's no growth, and I want to see more because my kids can understand it and the language pretty well. There's a lot of input from home. They're a native speaker there. So what do you suggest? How would you work with heritage learners?
Heritage learners, you can do some explicit stuff with, particularly, again, spelling and orthography, although in first language research, and we don't really have good research on this in second language, so I'll say that up front. But in terms of spelling and orthography, at least within English schools in the US, they have found that whether you teach spelling or not, doesn't make any difference in the long run. Like at the end of the first grade or second grade, you might get the people who get spelling and orthography teaching be ahead of their peers who aren't getting it. Mm-hmm. By the third or fourth grade, everybody's the same, right? So they find that in first language acquisition. My guess is if we did that kind of research in second language acquisition, we'd find something similar. So what I recommend for heritage stuff, so let's just focus on orthography and spelling. And grammar can get dragged along with this as well. You said grammatically correct sentences.
Yeah, and fluency. They want to see an improvement in their reading fluency.
Right. One of the things I suggest adding is, have you ever heard of discourse scrambles?
Mm-mm.
Okay, so a discourse scramble takes a paragraph of about 10 sentences. And I usually write these myself because I want to make sure they're coherent, because sometimes if you just pick up a newspaper or something, their writing is terrible. They're not very coherent. And you take the 10 sentences and you scramble them and you just order them, boom, 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 out of order. And you put students in pairs and you say, okay, now put these sentences in the order in which they have to happen. The details that students have to pay attention to in order to do that is amazing. They start paying attention more to spelling. Well, when is that, and grammar, particularly things where you have something in one sentence that's grammatically relates to something in another, later a follow-up sentence that's a related grammar thing, like whether you drop a pronoun or whether there's gender mark here and then that gender is carried over to that. And so they need to start looking at all these clues in order to make sure that they are putting these sentences in the right order. And so you've got some explicit learning going on and you've got some implicit learning going on. You got the best of both worlds, right? And so that's something that you might start dropping into your class, like not all the time, like once a week. Like in my short stories that I do in class, the ones I was telling you about earlier, my Spanish ones, each story has a discourse scramble that goes with it. But again, if you take that story, that's going to take up a week's worth of my time in class. That's one discourse scramble a week. And they take like 10 or 15 minutes to do. And then what I do is I make the students debrief with me. So why did you do that way? And what was your mistake? And then they start to articulate, oh, here's what I found. I saw that this thing matched that thing over there. And all of a sudden they're focusing on things that you don't have to make them learn explicitly. And then at the same time, they're reading words more closely. But if you read normal paragraphs, ever watch people read, they skip around all over the place and they skip. When you're doing a discourse scramble, you can't do that. You have to read each sentence carefully from beginning to end. Well, in your case, it'd be from beginning to end, right? Because it's the from beginning to end, not this way. Okay, from beginning to end, because if you can't miss anything, otherwise I may not know what comes next. And when you read another sentence, everything has to be read so carefully, and you get much more attention paid to spelling and orthography, verb forms, all kinds of things happen. And so consider that. And then that also works on their ability to construct written language, construct paragraphs, to write. You're implicitly working on their writing while they're doing discourse scrambles. So that's one technique I use. It's not the only one, but that's one that you might find useful.
Thank you.
I do it with second language learners, but you can do it. I've done it with heritage language learners too. But yeah, so.
And one last question, and it's going to be me asking. I'm going to bring a different Bill to my question. Bill Gates said at a major conference in San Diego that in 18 months, artificial intelligence will be able to teach our children to read and write. As you know, we are in a different era now with the AI. And I know that you are no longer researching, but I think it's time for you to come back to the research with what's all going on with the artificial intelligence. About what do you think about it? What's your thought about what he said?
Assuming that's true, I say big deal. Let artificial teach you to write. Artificial intelligence is never going to teach language or communication, and it's not going to happen. But before I get to the reasons why, Elon Musk was on Bill Maher on Friday night. And he is now working. He just met with congressional leaders in Washington. This is Elon Musk trying to put regulation and halting some of the work on AI. He believes that it's going in the wrong direction, and that some of the harmful byproducts, if the Congress does not get involved soon to start to regulate AI, then we're going to wind up doing things and having things that later on we're going to regret, right? So keep that in mind, and keep your eye on that, what's going on. So I think you might lobby for some of that yourself. You know, in California, we've got legislators who actually listen to us about stuff like that. So we're lucky that way. Okay. As far as teaching reading and writing, people think you can teach reading and writing. You really can't. Reading and writing, like language, has development trajectories and patterns and so on. And unless they can teach artificial intelligence to intuit what a learner is doing, which is not happening so far, then all you're going to get are these canned kind of things and so on. Because Bill Gates does not understand what reading and writing is. He's making a prediction, saying things without he himself understanding the nature of reading and writing, and or how reading and writing are actually acquired by people, right? So there's that. So I think his prediction is premature, and probably, I don't want to say off the wall, but I could say off the wall. And secondly is, even if it were the case that you could teach reading and writing through AI, language teachers, we're all going to still be here, because AI, unless maybe 100 years from now, I don't know, we'll see. But think about creating stories and that on the moment interaction with learners, right? For AI to replace you as a language teacher, you have to teach AI to recognize and respond to learner language, right? So imagine if an AI chat hears a learner go, "Bill, Professor," what's the AI going to do with that? Because the AI, as an algorithm, the AI is not taught to, and another learner might do something else, and because there's variation among language learners. And so only teachers with experience with language learners know how to respond to that. Go, "Oh, sí, Bill es profesor." And then turn around, and immediately what a teacher wants to do is follow up and say, "Do you think he's a good professor? Es buen profesor?" Oh, sí, is the AI going to know how to do that? Not yet, not for a long time, right? Because it just can't. Again, Bill Gates, people like that, think that learning is some rote kind of endeavor. Language acquisition and learning to communicate are not, and never will be, right? And so it'll be a long time, won't be in our lifetime, I guarantee you. So my attitude is, if he can really show that they can teach reading and writing, great, that's less for me to worry about. I'm going to focus on communication and acquisition, because I know AI can't do that.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
Sorry, thank you, Bill, for the session. Oh, thank you.
Yeah, let's read.
Oh, good. Can-do statements. Yeah, can-do statements. I used those at Michigan State. I got rid of classroom testing, started using can-do statements. Yeah, you can adapt those to fit your curriculum so that they're micro can-do statements, right? They don't have to be those broad, artful ones. So yeah, like I used to have can-do statements like, I can describe my daily routine saying these 5 things: when I go up, when I go to bed, and 3 things I do every day. That's how we did can-do statements, right? For expression, right? So anyway, you can micro them if you want.
You have
all right.
Regards from Michigan.
Oh yeah, told that to you too. Thank you so much. Yeah, Michigan. Michigan is my second home.
Thank you, Professor Van Patten. It was very, it's enlightening. Oh, it's always jumping. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. You all have a great rest of your day. Good luck in your teaching endeavors, and I'm wishing you the best in your work. Thank you.
להתראות.
ותודה לך, אורלי.
תודה, דפנה.
רונית, ביי.
רונית, ביי, תודה.
אורלי, ביי.
ביי, תודה דלית, ביי.
תודה רבה.
ביי,
מרתק.
תודה.